My parents sold my lake house to fund my sister's $150,000 wedding, laughing, "Thanks for the wedding present." I smiled and told them to check their mail. Their faces went pale when they saw. This is a story about betrayal, family, and finding the strength to reclaim what's rightfully yours. My own parents stole my inheritance, sold the one place that felt like home, and then publicly thanked me for the generous gift that funded my sister's dream wedding. How do you even begin to process a betrayal like that? I'm Chloe, I'm 34, and for as long as I can remember, the lake house my grandpa Arthur left me wasn't just a building, it was my sanctuary. It was my future, the quiet cornerstone of my dreams, and without a doubt, my most treasured possession. But when I discovered my parents had secretly sold it off to bankroll my sister Brianna's extravagant wedding, something inside me didn't just break, it shattered into a million pieces. Our family always had a clear pecking order, with Brianna reigning at the top and me somewhere near the bottom. But this crossed a line I never even knew existed. My grandpa Arthur was the one person in my family who genuinely saw me. While my parents were constantly swept up in Brianna's demands and dramatic flair, Grandpa Arthur would take me fishing, patiently teach me how to fix things, and spin tales about his own childhood. He was a self-made carpenter, a man of grit who built that lake house with his own two hands back in the 70s. From the time I was 5 until I left for college, every summer was spent there. The lake house itself wasn't fancy by today's standards. It was a rustic, 3-bedroom cabin, perched on 3 acres of waterfront property on Lake Winnipegosis in New Hampshire. But it had character, a massive stone fireplace, sturdy wooden beams, and windows that framed a breathtaking panoramic view of the water. The dock stretched 20 feet into the lake, and I spent countless hours there, dangling my feet in the cool, clear water. The boathouse held Grandpa Arthur's old fishing boat and the canoe he taught me to paddle when I was just 7. Every single corner of that property was steeped in memories that defined my childhood. When Grandpa Arthur passed away 6 years ago, everyone just assumed the lake house would be divided up amongst us grandkids or sold to split the money. But then his attorney read the will aloud. I can still hear the words, "To my granddaughter Chloe, who appreciates the value of hard work and solitude, I leave my lake house and all its contents, in the hope that she will find the same peace there that I did." The looks on my parents' faces were priceless, pure, unadulterated shock. My mother, Deborah, recovered quickly, plastering on a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh, how wonderful, Chloe. You always were Arthur's favorite." Her words sounded congratulatory, but her tone reeked of accusation, as if I'd somehow cheated the system. My father, Michael, just looked disappointed, probably already calculating the lost potential income from a sale. Brianna, who was 27 at the time, made no effort to hide her outrage. "But that property is worth a fortune now. Why would he leave it all to Chloe? I spent just as much time there as she did." This, of course, was a complete fabrication. Brianna had always found the lake house boring after a day or two, preferring to rush back to civilization for shopping and socializing. This moment was just one thread in a lifelong tapestry. From childhood, our family operated with Brianna as the sun, and the rest of us as orbiting planets. She was the pretty one, the social one, the one who needed things. I was the responsible one, the self-sufficient one, the one who was expected to understand when resources invariably flowed to Brianna. When Brianna wanted ballet lessons, my parents found the money. When I wanted to attend a summer architecture camp, I was told to save my babysitting money. When Brianna crashed her first car 3 months after getting her license, my parents replaced it. When I needed textbooks for college, I worked 2 jobs to afford them. Despite this glaring imbalance, I managed to build a successful career as an architect. I put myself through school, secured internships through sheer hard work rather than connections, and now own a small but respected firm specializing in sustainable residential design. My parents acknowledged my success with a mild, almost surprised air, as if they hadn't expected me to accomplish anything without their direct intervention. Brianna, meanwhile, bounced from job to job, always finding reasons why each position was beneath her or failed to appreciate her talents. She worked briefly at a boutique, then a real estate office, and most recently as a social media coordinator. None lasted more than 6 months. Throughout her 20s, my parents subsidized her rent, paid off her credit cards multiple times, and never once questioned her choices. When Brianna met Daniel 3 years ago, my parents were ecstatic. Daniel came from money, worked at his father's investment firm, and seemed capable of maintaining the lavish lifestyle Brianna felt she deserved. What my parents either didn't notice or chose to ignore was that Daniel shared Brianna's tendency toward financial irresponsibility. He drove an expensive car, wore designer clothes, and took Brianna on lavish vacations, but he lived in an apartment he could barely afford and carried significant debt. When they announced their engagement last year, Brianna immediately began planning what she dubbed her dream wedding. Initial discussions involved reasonable venues and guest lists, but within weeks, her vision had ballooned dramatically. The guest list swelled from 100 to 300. The local country club was ditched for an exclusive resort. The simple white dress became a custom designer gown. I was genuinely happy for my sister and even offered to help with the planning. I even suggested the lake house could be a beautiful rehearsal dinner venue or a spot for pre-wedding photos. She dismissed it, saying it wasn't glamorous enough. I attributed this to her desire for more upscale settings, never imagining the deeper, darker truth. As the wedding planning progressed, my parents started looking increasingly stressed at family dinners. My father, Michael, normally quick to boast about business successes, became vague when asked how work was going. My mother, Deborah, developed a new habit of checking her phone whenever financial topics arose. When I directly asked if they were concerned about wedding costs, my father dismissed the question with forced cheerfulness. Brianna only gets married once, he said, though we all knew this was statistically unlikely given her history of brief, intense relationships. We want her day to be perfect. I even offered to contribute a few $1,000s toward the wedding, though it would strain my own budget. My mother almost seemed ready to accept before my father interrupted. That's very generous, Chloe, but unnecessary. We have it under control. In retrospect, the signs were all there. I simply failed to imagine how far my parents would go to maintain the toxic family dynamic that had defined our lives for decades. 6 months before the wedding, the subtle hints that something was terribly wrong became impossible to ignore. Brianna's Instagram feed transformed into a showcase of pure extravagance. There was the reveal of her dress, which she mentioned had been handcrafted in France. Sample photos from her chosen photographer, who I later learned charged $15,000 for a wedding package. Weekly updates about floral arrangements, custom invitations, monogrammed everything. During a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, I casually mentioned my plans to spend a long weekend at the lake house to do some maintenance and check on the property. "Oh, you don't need to bother with that," my mother said quickly, too quickly. "Your father hired someone to look after things." This was news to me. "Really? Who?" I asked. "Just someone new," my father replied, suddenly very interested in his mashed potatoes. "David Miller retired." That was strange, since I'd spoken with David Miller just 2 months earlier, and he'd mentioned no plans to retire. I made a mental note to call him the next day. When I tried his number, it went straight to voicemail. I tried again later in the week with the same result. I told myself he was probably just busy, but a cold dread started to spread through me. Something felt wrong. Around the same time, I noticed my parents had removed several family photos from their living room walls, specifically, ones that included the lake house in the background. When I asked about this, my mother claimed they were being reframed. Then came the shopping spree. Brianna arrived at another family dinner wearing a diamond bracelet I'd never seen before. "Early wedding gift from Mom and Dad," she explained, jangling it on her wrist. The following week, she announced she and Daniel had booked a 3-week honeymoon to Bali and the Maldives, staying in overwater bungalows and private villas. The week after that, she pulled up in a brand new BMW, replacing her perfectly functional car. "Where's all this money coming from?" I asked my friend Isabel over coffee. Brianna's wedding has morphed into something out of a celebrity magazine, and now there are all these expensive gifts, too. Daniel's family is contributing, maybe? Isabel suggested. Didn't you say they have money? The theory made sense until I ran into Daniel at a local restaurant where I was picking up takeout. He was having dinner with a colleague, and I stopped briefly to say hello. Chloe, just the person I wanted to see, he said, giving me an unexpected hug. I haven't had a chance to thank you properly. Thank me for what? I asked, utterly bewildered. For your incredibly generous contribution to the wedding, he said. Brianna told me how much it means to her to have your support. I stood there, utterly confused. My contribution? Daniel suddenly looked uncomfortable, realizing he might have spoken out of turn. You know what? I think I misunderstood something, Brianna said. Never mind. I left with my takeout and a growing, sickening sense of unease. The next strange incident occurred when I received a call from Eleanor Jenkins, whose property bordered the lake house on the north side. Chloe, dear, I wanted to check in about the sale. Will you still be coming up to visit occasionally? We'll miss seeing you around. My heart started pounding like a drum against my ribs. Eleanor, what sale are you talking about? There was a long pause. Oh my. I think I may have spoken out of turn. Perhaps you should talk to your parents. I pressed for more information, but Eleanor suddenly remembered an appointment and ended the call. I immediately tried calling the lake house landline, something I rarely did since I usually just showed up. The number was no longer in service. I checked my online banking and noticed something else concerning. There had been 3 failed attempts to access my primary savings account, all using an incorrect password. The attempts had come from an IP address I didn't recognize. At this point, I could no longer ignore the mounting, terrifying evidence. Something was happening with the lake house, and my parents were being deliberately, maliciously deceptive. I decided to take a day off work and drive up to see the property for myself. The 3-hour drive from Boston to Lake Winnipegosis gave me plenty of time to consider the possibilities. Perhaps my parents had rented out the lake house to help pay for the wedding, though they had no legal right to do so. Maybe they had borrowed against it somehow, though again, they had no authority. The worst-case scenario seemed too awful to contemplate. I tried to reassure myself. My name was on the deed. The property taxes came out of my account automatically. Grandpa Arthur's will had been crystal clear. Whatever was happening, I told myself, could be fixed. As I turned onto the familiar gravel road leading to the lake house, I noticed fresh tire tracks that had carved deeper ruts than usual. The old wooden sign reading Whitaker's Rest that had hung at the entrance for decades was gone. Then I saw the moving truck. My first thought, bizarrely, was that someone was delivering furniture. Maybe my parents had decided to surprise me with new pieces for the lake house, though that would be wildly out of character. But as I pulled closer, I saw people carrying things out of the house, not in. A middle-aged couple stood in the driveway, directing the movers. The woman was pointing toward the boathouse, while the man checked something off on a clipboard. Neither was anyone I recognized. I parked my car and approached them, trying to keep my voice steady. Excuse me, what is going on here? This is private property. The woman turned to me with a friendly smile. Oh, hello there. Are you from the neighborhood? No, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. This is my house. I'm Chloe Whitaker. This property belongs to me. The couple exchanged confused glances. The man stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm Robert Peterson, and this is my wife, Linda. There must be some mistake. We purchased this property 3 weeks ago. We closed on it last Friday. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. That is impossible. I never sold this house. There must be some misunderstanding. Robert looked concerned now. He walked to his car and retrieved a folder of documents, which he handed to me. Here are all the sale papers. We bought it from Michael and Deborah Whitaker. Are they relatives of yours? My parents. They had sold my house without my knowledge or consent. I flipped through the documents with trembling hands, seeing my parents' signatures on page after page. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. My signature. Or rather, a poor, crude imitation of it. This is not my signature, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I did not sign these papers. I never agreed to sell this property. The Petersons looked horrified. We had no idea, Linda said, her voice soft with distress. The sale went through a realtor, and everything seemed legitimate. We've already sold our previous home. I handed the papers back, struggling to maintain composure. I'm sorry, but I need to speak with my attorney. This property was left to me by my grandfather. My parents had no right to sell it. I somehow managed to get back to my car before the tears came, hot and stinging. I sat there, sobbing uncontrollably, staring at the home that had been mine yesterday and now apparently belonged to strangers. Through the windshield, I could see the Petersons having an animated discussion, occasionally glancing my way with concerned expressions. After pulling myself together enough to drive, I headed straight to the county records office. The clerk was sympathetic as I explained the situation and helped me locate the relevant documents. Sure enough, there was a record of the sale dated 3 weeks earlier. The property had sold for $375,000, which I knew was at least $175,000 below market value. The sale had been rushed, with the buyers paying cash. As I was leaving the records office, my phone rang. It was Eleanor Jenkins. Chloe, I've been feeling terrible since our call. I think you should know what I overheard. I was at the general store about a month ago when your parents came in. They were talking about using the lake house money for Brianna's wedding. Your father specifically said they needed to take care of it before you found out. I assumed you had eventually agreed to the sale. I'm so sorry. I thanked Eleanor for the information and asked her to email me a written statement of what she had heard, which she agreed to do. My next call was to my friend Vanessa, who worked as a real estate attorney. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though my voice broke several times. They forged my signature, Vanessa. They sold my house to pay for Brianna's wedding. Jesus, Chloe, that's not just unethical. That's criminal, Vanessa said, her voice sharp with disbelief. Forgery, fraud, theft, you name it. Do you want me to meet you somewhere? You shouldn't be alone right now. We arranged to meet at her office in Concord. On the drive there, I received a notification from my bank about another attempted access to my account. It was as if learning about the house had opened my eyes to a whole pattern of calculated deception. Vanessa reviewed the documents I had obtained and confirmed my worst fears. This is open and shut, Chloe. Your parents had no legal right to sell the property. The forged signature is clear fraud. We can get the sale reversed, though it will be messy and take some time. The poor buyers will have to be compensated for their trouble. Do you want to pursue criminal charges against your parents? The question hit me like a physical blow. Did I want my own parents arrested? Despite everything, the answer was no. I wanted justice. I wanted my property back. But I didn't want to see my parents in handcuffs. I want to handle this carefully, I said finally. Brianna's wedding is in 3 weeks. I don't want to detonate this bomb before then. Vanessa looked skeptical. You're going to let them go through with the wedding, using your money after what they did? I had been asking myself the exact same question. Part of me wanted to burn it all down immediately, to call the police, to call my parents and Brianna, and expose everything. But another part, the strategic part, suggested a different approach. If I confront them now, I explained, it will be chaos. The focus will be on saving the wedding, not on what they did. Emotions will be running high, and somehow I'll be positioned as the villain for ruining Brianna's special day. If I wait until after, there's nowhere to hide. The deed is done, literally and figuratively. Vanessa nodded slowly. That makes sense. So, what's the plan? We document everything now. We prepare all the legal paperwork. We get statements from Eleanor and anyone else who might have relevant information. We build an airtight case. And then the day after the wedding, we deploy it, cold, Vanessa said with grudging admiration. Brutal, but fair. As I drove home that evening, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from my mother asking about wedding details and Brianna sending photos of floral arrangements. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They were carrying on as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just committed a crime against me. I didn't respond to any of the messages, unsure I could maintain the facade of normalcy. That night, I barely slept, alternating between blinding rage, profound grief, and utter disbelief. By morning, one thing was crystal clear. I would get my lake house back, and my family would never be the same again. The engagement party was scheduled at the Langham, a 5-star hotel in Boston. Brianna had originally planned something more intimate at our parents' country club, but as with everything else, her vision had expanded dramatically. I considered not attending, but that would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. I arrived 20 minutes late, partly due to anxiety and partly as a small act of rebellion. The hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed with thousands of white orchids, crystal chandeliers, and ice sculptures. A string quartet played in one corner, while uniformed staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Brianna spotted me immediately and rushed over, resplendent in a beaded white gown that could easily have passed for a wedding dress itself. "Chloe, finally. I was worried you wouldn't make it. Isn't this amazing? Wait until you see the cake." I hugged her stiffly, searching her face for any sign of guilt or complicity. All I saw was her usual self-absorbed excitement. "It's certainly elaborate for an engagement party," I managed to say. Brianna waved dismissively. "You only get engaged once." "Well, to the right person, anyway," she giggled, as though her 2 previous broken engagements were charming quirks rather than concerning patterns. "Where are Mom and Dad?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Over by the champagne fountain. They're talking to the wedding planner about adding fireworks to the reception." Can you believe it? Actual fireworks. I made my way across the room, stopping to greet family, friends, and relatives. Everyone was buzzing about the spectacular wedding plans, with several people commenting on how generous my parents were being. Each compliment felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I finally spotted my parents near an actual flowing fountain of champagne, deep in conversation with a sharp-dressed woman who I assumed was the wedding planner. I approached just close enough to overhear without being noticed. "The fireworks display will add $20,000 to the budget," the planner was saying. "But the photos will be absolutely worth it. Plus, we've had a cancellation at the estate, so we can now offer the premium garden space for the cocktail hour at only an additional $5,000. My father, Michael, nodded, though I could see tension around his eyes. "Brianna deserves the best. Let's add both." The wedding planner beamed and walked away to make notes. My mother, Deborah, touched my father's arm. "Are you sure, Michael? We're already so far over budget." "It's fine," he said firmly. "The house money covered the essentials. We can put the extras on the equity line." I felt physically ill. The house money. My house money. Before I could decide whether to confront them immediately, Brianna clinked a spoon against her glass and called for everyone's attention. She and Daniel stood on a small platform at the front of the room. "Daniel and I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate with us," Brianna began, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "And we especially want to thank my amazing parents who are making our dream wedding possible." The crowd applauded as my parents waved modestly. "And a special thank you to my sister, Chloe," Brianna continued, finding me in the crowd, "for her incredibly generous wedding gift. We couldn't have done any of this without you, sis." All eyes turned to me. I froze, unable to respond, as the room erupted in applause. Daniel raised his glass in my direction, and my parents both smiled broadly, raising their glasses as well. "Thanks for the wedding present," my father called out to appreciative laughter from the guests. I managed a tight smile and a slight nod, then immediately headed for the restroom. I locked myself in a stall and tried to control my breathing, which had become rapid and shallow. They were publicly thanking me for a gift I never gave, for money stolen through fraud and forgery. The audacity was breathtaking. After splashing cold water on my face, I returned to the party, determined to maintain my composure. I needed to continue gathering information, not create a scene. I circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations for my generosity with non-committal smiles. My Aunt Carol cornered me by the dessert table. "Chloe, darling, such sad news about selling the lake house. I know how much it meant to you, but what a wonderful sister you are to make such a sacrifice for Brianna's happiness." I nearly choked on my champagne. "What exactly did you hear about the lake house, Aunt Carol?" "Just that you decided to sell it to help fund the wedding. Your mother mentioned you were having second thoughts, but she assured me you came around to the idea. She said you realized you weren't using it enough to justify keeping it." Each word was another revelation of the insidious narrative my parents had constructed. They weren't just thieves, they were actively working to control the story, to paint me as the benevolent, sacrificing sister. As I made my way through the party, I saw evidence of the lake house money everywhere. The customized sculpture depicting Brianna and Daniel dancing had cost thousands. The party favors were monogrammed crystal champagne flutes. Even the restrooms had been stocked with designer toiletries and fresh flower arrangements. I finally encountered my parents near the gift table. My mother embraced me warmly, as if nothing was wrong. "Chloe, you look beautiful tonight. That blue really brings out your eyes." "Thanks, Mom." "Quite a party." "Only the best for your sister," my father said, putting his arm around my shoulders. "We're so proud of you both, you know. Brianna with her upcoming marriage and you with your successful business." I wondered if he realized the irony. Brianna was being rewarded with a $150,000 wedding for finding someone to marry, while my years of hard work building a business from nothing merited only a casual mention. "The lake house sold quickly," I said, watching their faces carefully. My mother's smile faltered for just a millisecond before she recovered. "Oh, have you been up there recently?" "I met the new owners," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "The Petersons. They seem nice." My parents exchanged a quick, furtive glance. My father cleared his throat. "Yes, well, property values in that area have really peaked. It was a good time to sell." "Funny," I mused. "I don't remember putting it on the market." Another glance between them. My mother laughed nervously. "Chloe, this is hardly the time or place for this discussion. We should focus on celebrating Brianna's engagement." "You're right," I said, smiling, a cold, hard smile that didn't reach my eyes. "We'll have plenty of time to discuss it later." I left the party shortly after, unable to stomach any more of the farce. In the Uber home, I called Vanessa and updated her on everything I had learned. "They're gaslighting you now," she said, "creating a narrative where you agreed to the sale. This actually strengthens our case. It shows consciousness of guilt." "They seem to think they'll get away with it," I said, staring out at the Boston skyline, feeling a surge of resolve. "They have no idea what's coming." The next morning, I met Vanessa at her office to formalize our strategy. She had already drafted a preliminary legal brief outlining the unauthorized sale and forged documents. "Here's what we know," she said, pulling up a document on her computer. "Your parents sold the property for $375,000 on June 5th. The buyers paid cash, likely attracted by the below-market price. Your parents forged your signature on multiple documents, including the deed transfer. They appear to have accessed the funds immediately, as evidenced by the timing of deposits into their account and subsequent withdrawals for wedding expenses." "How did they get away with this?" I asked, my voice tight. "Don't these documents require notarization?" "That's our next avenue to investigate," Vanessa confirmed. "Either they found a notary willing to overlook the forgery, or, more likely, they forged the notary's signature as well. We'll need to track down whoever supposedly notarized these documents." I rubbed my temples, a headache building. "What about the buyers?" "The Petersons? They are innocent purchasers," Vanessa explained, "but unfortunately, they don't have clear title. A forged deed cannot transfer ownership, no matter how innocent the buyer. The good news for them is they will have recourse against your parents for fraud. The bad news for everyone is this will be messy." We spent the next hour outlining our approach. Vanessa would file for an emergency injunction to prevent any further financial transactions related to the property. She would also prepare documents to report the forgery to the district attorney's office, though we would hold off on filing those until after the wedding. "We should also consult with a criminal attorney," Vanessa suggested. "The DA may want to pursue charges regardless of your wishes once this comes to light." She connected me with Robert Sterling, a criminal defense attorney who occasionally worked with her firm. He agreed to meet us for lunch. "This is a clear case of fraud, forgery, and theft," Robert Sterling said after hearing the details. "The DA could absolutely pursue charges, and with the evidence you have, conviction would be likely. Your parents could be looking at substantial fines and potentially jail time." The thought made my stomach churn. "Is there any way to resolve this without criminal charges?" "Possibly," Robert Sterling conceded. If they immediately acknowledge what they did, return all the money and make restitution, the DA might be persuaded to accept a plea deal with probation rather than incarceration. But that depends on many factors, including the DA's discretion and your parents' cooperation. Over the next week, I assembled a comprehensive file documenting every aspect of the fraud. Eleanor Jenkins provided a written statement about the conversation she had overheard. I obtained bank records showing the suspicious deposit into my parents' account. Vanessa located the notary whose stamp appeared on the documents, who confirmed she had never notarized those papers and would provide an affidavit stating her stamp had been used fraudulently. Most damning of all, I found online posts from Brianna about wedding expenses that directly correlated with withdrawals from my parents' account after the lake house sale. In one post, she shared photos of her $15,000 dress. On the same day, my parents withdrew that exact amount. What about the emotional impact? I asked Vanessa during one of our planning sessions. I want them to understand what they've taken from me. It wasn't just property. It was my connection to my grandfather, my memories, my future plans for that place. That's why I suggested the letter, Vanessa said. The legal documents handle the factual and financial aspects. The letter is where you can address the personal betrayal. I spent days drafting, revising, and redrafting that letter. How do you adequately express the feeling of having your own parents steal from you? How do you convey the depth of betrayal when the people who should protect you decide your inheritance is theirs to take? In the end, I kept it simple and direct. Mom and Dad, what you did was not just illegal. It was a profound betrayal of trust. The lake house was not just property to me. It was my connection to Grandpa Arthur, who saw me when the rest of the family didn't. It was my sanctuary when life became overwhelming. It was my future, my plans, my dreams. You took that from me without asking. You forged my name. You lied to everyone, creating a fiction where I had consented. You spent the money on one day of celebration for Brianna, prioritizing her desires over my rightful inheritance. I am pursuing all legal avenues to reclaim what is mine. The attached documents outline the serious legal consequences of your actions. This could have been avoided with a simple conversation. Instead, you chose deception and theft. Brianna's wedding will proceed as planned. I will not punish her by disrupting her day, though I have serious questions about her knowledge of and complicity in this scheme. But once the wedding is over, there will be a reckoning. Sincerely, Chloe. As the wedding approached, maintaining the charade became increasingly difficult. Brianna sent daily texts with wedding updates. My mother called repeatedly about my bridesmaid dress fittings and rehearsal dinner details. My father emailed, asking if I was planning to give a toast at the reception. I responded to each communication with minimal engagement, pleading work commitments when possible. I attended the necessary pre-wedding events, including the final dress fitting and the rehearsal dinner, maintaining a detached politeness that several relatives commented on. You seem distant, Chloe. Is everything okay? My uncle asked during the rehearsal dinner. Just busy with work, I replied, with the practiced smile I had perfected over the past weeks and a slightly weary tone. And a bit tired from all the wedding excitement. The night before the wedding, I could barely sleep. I reviewed the plan one final time: attend the wedding, maintain composure, allow Brianna her day. Then, the morning after, Vanessa would send the legal package to my parents via courier, and I would forward my letter via email. The reckoning would begin. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I thought of Grandpa Arthur and what he would say about all this. I could almost hear his voice. Stand your ground, Chloe. Some things are worth fighting for. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, as if even nature was conspiring to give Brianna her ideal day. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon at St. John's Episcopal Church, with the reception to follow at the Rosewood Estate, one of the most exclusive venues in the region. I arrived at the church early for the bridesmaids' photographs, wearing the pale pink gown Brianna had selected. The photographer positioned us on the church steps, arranging and rearranging us for the perfect composition. Brianna stood in the center, radiant in her custom French gown with its 15-foot train and delicate beadwork that had taken artisans hundreds of hours to complete. Throughout the photo session, I maintained my composure by mentally cataloging the costs: Brianna's dress, $15,000. Professional hair and makeup for the bridal party, $3,000. Photographer and videographer package, $15,000. Flowers for the church, $8,000. Each item represented another piece of my stolen property, another memory of the lake house converted into ephemeral wedding trappings. The ceremony itself was elaborate, with a string quartet, a professional opera singer, and custom-written vows. Brianna cried beautifully on cue, her makeup somehow remaining perfect. Daniel looked handsome and polished in his designer tuxedo. My parents beamed from the front row, the proud architects of this perfect day. I performed my bridesmaid duties mechanically, holding Brianna's bouquet during the ring exchange, adjusting her train as needed, smiling for photographs. Inside, I felt nothing but a cold, steely determination to see this through. After the ceremony, guests were transported to the Rosewood estate via a fleet of vintage Rolls-Royce cars. The estate had been transformed with thousands of flowers, twinkling lights, and elegant drapery. Cocktail hour featured a raw bar, a caviar station, and a champagne fountain identical to the one from the engagement party. I circulated among the guests, accepting congratulations on my sister's behalf, and deflecting questions about the lake house with vague responses. It was a difficult decision, I would say, or sometimes we have to make sacrifices for family. Dinner was served in the estate's grand ballroom, where each table featured elaborate centerpieces of orchids and roses. The menu included Wagyu beef, butter-poached lobster, and gold-flake desserts. A 10-piece band played on a custom-built stage, and professional dancers had been hired to encourage guests onto the dance floor. During the toasts, my father stood and raised his glass. To my beautiful daughter Brianna and her wonderful new husband, Daniel. Your mother, and I could not be prouder. We have spared no expense to make this day perfect for you, because you deserve nothing but the best. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. I took a long sip of champagne, avoiding having to smile. Brianna's maid of honor gave a touching speech about their friendship, and then Daniel's best man shared amusing anecdotes about the groom. Finally, Brianna herself stood up, slightly tipsy from champagne. I just want to thank everyone who made this day possible, she said, her voice thick with emotion. My amazing parents who gave me everything I ever wanted. My wonderful new husband who I love more than anything. And my sister, Chloe, who made the biggest sacrifice of all. She turned to look at me, her eyes glistening. I know how much that lake house meant to you. And the fact that you were willing to let it go for my special day means more than I can say. The room erupted in applause. I felt dozens of eyes on me, expecting some response. I raised my glass slightly and nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As the evening progressed, the alcohol flowed freely and the dance floor filled. The cake cutting, the first dance, the father-daughter dance, all unfolded according to plan. I remained on the periphery, observing it all with detached interest, like an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture's rituals. Around midnight, as the party was still in full swing, my parents cornered me near the dessert table. You've been quiet all day, my mother said, her words slightly slurred from wine. Are you not having a good time? It's a beautiful wedding, I replied neutrally. The best money could buy, my father said with a wink. Or the best lake house could buy, I should say. He laughed at his own joke. We never properly thanked you, my mother added, squeezing my arm, for understanding about the house. It really was the only way to give Brianna the wedding she deserved. I looked at them, both these people who had raised me, who had just admitted to stealing from me as casually as commenting on the weather. A strange calm settled over me. You should check your mail tomorrow, I said with a slight, unnerving smile. My father frowned. What? Why? Just some information I think you'll find interesting, I said. Enjoy the rest of the evening. I walked away, leaving them looking utterly confused. It was the only moment of genuine satisfaction I had felt all day. The wedding concluded with a grand sparkler send-off as Brianna and Daniel departed for their 3-week honeymoon in a vintage Bentley. Guests tossed rose petals and cheered as the car pulled away. My parents stood arm in arm, looking exhausted but triumphant. I returned to my apartment and sent a text to Vanessa. Wedding complete. Proceed as planned tomorrow. The next morning, at precisely 9 a.m., a courier delivered the legal package to my parents' home. It contained documentation of the forgery, statements from witnesses, bank records showing the transfer of funds, and legal notices of the actions being taken to reverse the sale and investigate the fraud. Simultaneously, I sent my letter via email to both my parents. At 9:01, my phone began ringing. First my father, then my mother, then back to my father again. I let each call go to voicemail. At 9:30, the text started. "What is this, Chloe? Call us immediately." My father. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Please answer your phone." My mother. "You cannot do this to us. To your sister. We need to talk." My father, again. I didn't respond to any of them. By noon, other family members began calling. Apparently, my parents had started reaching out to relatives, either for support or to try to manage the narrative. My phone buzzed constantly with messages expressing confusion, shock, and, in some cases, outrage on my behalf. At 1 p.m., I received a call from an unknown international number. It was Brianna, calling from her honeymoon. "What the hell, Chloe?" she shrieked, her voice frantic. "Mom and Dad are completely freaking out. They said you're suing them on the day after my wedding. How could you be so selfish? Did they tell you why I'm suing them?" I asked calmly, my voice steady. "Something about the lake house. They said you changed your mind about helping with the wedding and now you're being vindictive." "Brianna, they forged my signature and sold my house without my permission. They stole from me to pay for your wedding. Did you know about it?" There was a long pause. "I knew they were using money from the lake house sale," she finally said, her voice smaller, defeated. "But they told me you had agreed to it, that you were doing it as a wedding gift." "And you believe that?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping me. "That I would give up my inheritance from Grandpa Arthur for your one-day celebration?" "It's not just one day," she protested weakly. "It's my marriage, my future with Daniel." "Your marriage and future with Daniel have nothing to do with stealing my property," I stated, my patience wearing thin. "If you knew nothing about the forgery, then my issue is not with you. But if you were complicit in any way, there will be consequences for that too." Brianna started crying. "You're ruining everything. We're going to have to come home early now." Daniel is furious. "I'm sorry your honeymoon is being interrupted," I said, not feeling sorry at all. "But this is a situation of Mom and Dad's making, not mine." After hanging up, I turned off my phone. I needed space from the barrage of family drama. Instead, I called Vanessa from my landline for an update. "Your parents contacted my office," she reported. "They're asking for a meeting, saying they want to resolve this as a family without legal involvement." "Too late for that," I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. "What about the Petersons?" "They are understandably upset," Vanessa explained. "I've explained the situation, and they're cooperating with the process to unwind the sale. They will be seeking damages from your parents for the fraud, but they are not blaming you." By evening, I turned my phone back on to find dozens of missed calls and messages. Most notably, a text from my father, "Family emergency meeting tomorrow at our house. 2 p.m. Please come. We need to fix this." I consulted with Vanessa and Robert Sterling, who both advised me not to meet with my parents alone. We agreed that Vanessa would accompany me as my legal representation. When we arrived at my parents' house the next day, I was surprised to find not just my parents waiting, but also Brianna and Daniel, apparently back early from their honeymoon, my father's brother, Uncle Steve, and my mother's sister, Aunt Carol. Clearly, my parents had called in reinforcements. My father looked shocked when I walked in with Vanessa. "Who is this?" "We said family only." "This is Vanessa Miller, my attorney," I said. "She goes wherever I go for discussions about this matter." "We don't need lawyers for a family discussion," my mother protested, her voice shrill. "This stopped being just a family discussion when you committed fraud," I replied, the words cutting through the tense air. The room fell uncomfortably silent. Brianna sat on the couch, looking pale and tired, still in traveling clothes. Daniel stood behind her, his face tight with anger. Uncle Steve and Aunt Carol exchanged uneasy glances. My father tried a different approach. "Chloe, honey, we know you're upset. There was a misunderstanding about the lake house. We thought we had your implicit consent. Implicit consent? I repeated, a cold fury rising in my chest. You forged my signature on legal documents. You sold property that did not belong to you. You took hundreds of thousands of dollars that were not yours to take. Which part of that was a misunderstanding? We were going to pay you back, my mother said weakly, barely above a whisper. With what money? When was there a plan, or were you just hoping I wouldn't find out until it was too late? No one answered. I opened my laptop and connected it to their television. Let me show you exactly what happened, so there's no more room for misunderstandings. Over the next 30 minutes, I presented the evidence Vanessa and I had compiled. The forged documents with my fake signature. Bank records showing the transfer of funds directly correlating with wedding expenses. A timeline of events showing the deliberate deception. Eleanor Jenkins' statement about the conversation she overheard. Proof that the notary's signature and stamp had also been forged. When I finished, the room was deathly quiet. Brianna was openly crying. Daniel looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. My aunt and uncle appeared horrified. Do you have any idea what you've done? I asked my parents, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. Not just legally, but to our family? To our relationship? You stole from me. You violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible. For what? So Brianna could have gold flakes on her wedding cake. My father finally spoke, his voice subdued, defeated. We made a terrible mistake. We got caught up in giving Brianna the wedding she wanted. We told ourselves we would figure out how to make it right with you later. By creating a false narrative where I had agreed to sell, by gaslighting me and lying to the entire family, I pressed. We panicked, my mother admitted, her eyes downcast. Once we started down this path, we didn't know how to stop. Brianna looked up, her makeup streaked with tears. I didn't know they forged your signature, Chloe. I swear, they told me you had agreed to help with the wedding by selling the lake house. I thought it was incredibly generous, but not impossible. You've always been the responsible one, the one who makes sacrifices. The last sentence hung in the air, unintentionally revealing the family dynamic that had made this entire, horrifying situation possible in the first place. I had always been expected to sacrifice for Brianna. This was just the most extreme, most painful version of a pattern established long ago. What happens now? My father asked, looking at Vanessa. That depends partly on Chloe, she replied. The legal process to unwind the fraudulent sale is already underway. The Petersons will need to be compensated for their troubles. There will be financial penalties and legal fees. As for criminal charges, that will be up to the district attorney, though Chloe's wishes will carry significant weight. All eyes turned to me. I want my house back, I said firmly. I want every penny that was taken from me returned, plus interest and damages. I want a public acknowledgement of what you did and an apology to everyone you lied to about this. And I want you both to get counseling to understand why you thought this was acceptable. My parents nodded mutely. As for criminal charges, I continued, I do not want to see you in jail, but that may not be entirely up to me. What you did was a crime, and there may be consequences beyond what I can control. Uncle Steve cleared his throat. I had no idea any of this was happening. Michael, Deborah, what were you thinking? This is your daughter, your own child. We always favored Brianna, my mother said quietly, the words a painful confession. We never meant to, but we did. She needed more, demanded more, and we responded to that. Chloe was always so capable, so self-sufficient. We took her for granted. That's not an excuse for theft, I said, my voice raw. No, it's not, my father agreed, his shoulders slumped. Nothing excuses what we did. We betrayed you, Chloe. We violated your trust, and we are so sorry. Their apology felt both genuine and wholly inadequate. The damage was done. Trust, once broken at such a fundamental level, could not be easily repaired. We will do whatever it takes to make this right, my mother added. I looked around the room at my family, seeing them with a new, painful clarity. The parents who had always prioritized Brianna's wants over my needs. The sister who had benefited from this dynamic her entire life. The extended family who had observed but never intervened. Making this right will take time, I said finally. And things will never be the same between us. That's the real cost of what you did. As Vanessa and I left the house, I felt a strange mix of vindication and profound sadness. I had stood up for myself, but at what cost? The family I had known was irreparably changed. Yet, somehow, I also felt lighter, as if a burden I had carried for years had finally been set down. The legal aftermath unfolded over the next 6 months. The sale of the lake house was invalidated, with the court ruling that the forged documents could not transfer legal ownership. The Petersons were understandably upset, but ultimately settled for a compensation package that included all their moving expenses, legal fees, and additional damages for the inconvenience. My parents liquidated investments and took out a home equity loan to repay me the full value of the property, plus interest and damages. They narrowly avoided criminal charges after the district attorney agreed to a deal that included community service, financial restitution, and mandatory counseling. The lake house returned to my possession, though not without emotional complications. The first time I visited after regaining ownership, I sat on the dock for hours, reconnecting with the property and processing everything that had happened. The space felt different, somehow tainted by the betrayal, yet still fundamentally mine. I spent that summer restoring the lake house, both physically and spiritually. I replaced the locks and installed a security system. I repainted walls, refinished floors, and updated the kitchen that had remained largely unchanged since Grandpa Arthur's time. Each improvement felt like reclaiming the space, making it mine again. My relationship with my family entered a new phase. Brianna and I spoke infrequently. At first, our conversations were awkward and strained. She had returned most of the wedding gifts after learning the truth. Though she and Daniel remained married, their honeymoon had been cut short, and the fairy tale beginning to their marriage had been irreparably tarnished. During one of our rare phone calls, Brianna finally asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. Would you have helped with the wedding if they had asked you directly? Would you have sold the lake house voluntarily? I considered the question carefully. No, I said finally. The lake house was never mine to give away for a wedding. It was Grandpa Arthur's legacy, his life's work. He entrusted it to me specifically because he knew I valued it for what it was, not what it could be converted into. I might have contributed some money to your wedding, but the house was never an option. Brianna was quiet for a moment. I think I always knew that, she admitted, her voice wistful. Maybe that's why I never questioned their story too deeply. It was easier to believe you had agreed than to face the truth. My parents and I established a careful distance. We spoke monthly, met occasionally for brief meals, but the easy familiarity was gone. They continued with their counseling, gradually coming to terms with the damage they had caused and the patterns that had led to their actions. We always thought we were doing what was best for both of you, my mother said during one difficult conversation. Brianna seemed to need more support, more attention, more resources. You were so capable, so independent. We told ourselves it balanced out somehow. It never balanced, I replied, the old resentment bubbling up. You took my independence as permission to give everything to Brianna. Being self-sufficient became a punishment. My father nodded slowly. We see that now. We failed you, Chloe. Not just with the lake house, but throughout your life. We took your strength for granted instead of nurturing it. These conversations were painful, but necessary. They represented the first honest exchanges we had ever had about the insidious family dynamic that had shaped all our lives. 6 months after the wedding, I held a small gathering at the restored lake house. I invited close friends who had supported me through the ordeal, as well as a few extended family members who had reached out with genuine concern. My parents and Brianna were not invited, a boundary that felt necessary for my healing. As we sat around the fire pit that Grandpa Arthur had built with his own hands, watching the sunset over the lake, my friend Isabel raised her glass. To Chloe, who taught us all that standing up for yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. The simple toast brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had accepted the narrative that putting my own needs first was somehow wrong. That sacrifice was my designated role in the family. Breaking that pattern had been painful, but essential. The lake house became my sanctuary in a new way. I began spending one weekend a month there, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. I established new traditions, new memories. I planted a garden that bloomed in spring, built a reading nook in the sunroom, and learned to sail on Grandpa Arthur's old boat that I had carefully restored. A year after the wedding, Brianna and Daniel welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Emma. The birth created an opportunity for cautious reconciliation. I visited them in the hospital, holding my tiny niece and feeling the complicated emotions of family bonds that persist despite deep wounds. "I want her to know her aunt," Brianna said, watching me rock the baby. "I want her to know the lake house and Grandpa Arthur's legacy. I want things to be different for her than they were for us." It was the closest thing to a genuine apology I had received from my sister, an acknowledgement that the patterns needed to change for the next generation. 2 years after the wedding, I invited my parents to the lake house for the first time since the incident. It was a brief visit, just an afternoon, but an important step. They walked through the renovated space with visible emotion, noting the changes I had made while respecting the original character of the home. "Arthur would be proud of what you've done here," my father said quietly, running his hand along the original woodwork. "He always said you understood the value of this place in a way the rest of us never did." My mother paused by the framed photo of Grandpa Arthur that I had placed prominently in the living room. "We lost sight of what matters," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "We got caught up in appearances, in Brianna's demands, in our own insecurities as parents. We forgot that some things are worth more than money can measure." Their visit was neither a full reconciliation nor a complete forgiveness, but rather an acknowledgement that healing is a process, not an event. Some trust might eventually be rebuilt, but our relationship would never return to what it was before. Perhaps that was for the best. The most important lesson I learned through this ordeal was about the nature of boundaries. For years, I had allowed my family to take advantage of my independence and resilience. I had accepted less while Brianna received more, telling myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their support or approval. But in doing so, I had enabled the very dynamic that ultimately led to the theft of my inheritance. Standing up for myself was not just about reclaiming the lake house. It was about reclaiming my place in the family narrative. It was about saying clearly, I matter. My needs matter. My inheritance matters. My boundaries matter. 3 years after the wedding, I stood on the dock at sunset, watching the light play across the water. The lake house was fully mine again, in every sense. I had defended it, reclaimed it, restored it, and made new memories within its walls. Grandpa Arthur's legacy continued, not just in the physical structure, but in the strength he had seen in me long before I recognized it in myself. This whole experience changed me forever. So, let me ask you, have you ever had to stand up to family members who crossed important boundaries? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel for more stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect what's rightfully theirs. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most important relationships we need to honor are the ones with ourselves.